A new demand today from the New Democrats. They're gearing up for their opposition day on Friday, where they'll push to expand the Liberals' recent affordability measures.
We're going to be forcing a vote to expand the GST to cover monthly bills, like your cell phone and internet bill, and to make sure that it's permanent. In addition, we want to expand the checks to include seniors, that's retired workers, and people living with disabilities. We need to see this relief that's permanent. We need to see it expanded. We need the working class to get some real supports.
The Liberal government passed their GST holiday with the help of the NDP through the House of Commons last week, but the Liberals' proposed $250 rebate check remains up in the air. British Columbia MP and New Democrat finance critic Don Davies joins me now. Mr. Davies, welcome back to the show.
Great to be with you, David.
There's a couple of things I want to start with, talk about, but let's start with the rebate check. Jagmeet Singh, your leader today, was emphatic that he wants this expanded beyond working Canadians to include seniors and others. How far are you willing to push that as a party? Are you willing to block the $250 for the people it's intended for if it doesn't include these other groups?
Well, in a word, yes. I think we've been very clear from the beginning that this is unacceptable. You know, the Liberals' plan is patently unfair and frankly absurd. You know, how do you justify sending a check for $149,000 to someone working and then not send a check to a retired senior on a fixed income of, say, $25,000 or someone on an injured worker pension making $35,000 with kids? It makes no sense, and we're clear that we won't support it until it's fixed.
Okay, so it's for people with employment income of $149,000 or less who would get this. So nobody gets it unless everybody gets it, essentially, who needs it, is the NDP position. Because I know when we spoke last, you were supporting the GST holiday, even though you said that was an imperfect piece of legislation because people needed a relief on the things that it did cover. But you're not willing to make that same compromise here.
Well, first of all, we've split those two things. That's right. The first thing we demanded and got. So the reason that we supported the GST relief, David, is it goes to everybody. You know, anybody who needs to buy children's toys or who's going to be buying food or eating at restaurants this Christmas and holiday season qualifies. So it doesn't have the same inbuilt unfairness that the $250 rebate issue does. So that's why we did that. That's why we supported the GST rebate, like the Conservatives proposed, frankly, in their 2021 budget, right, where they proposed a 1-month GST tax holiday. So we're consistent, and we know people are struggling, David, so getting relief out the door fast this holiday season is our priority, so we did that for the GST. But we have some time on the $250 rebate because that's not slated to go out until the springtime.
Right. Yes, we're a long way from the 2021 election when the Conservatives promised the GST holiday and the Liberals said it was too expensive. And here we are on the other side of that argument right now. But I wonder, you know, Chrystia Freeland was asked about this yesterday, and she said there are vigorous conversations happening with the opposition parties on this whole issue. Is there a negotiation happening at all? Is there any kind of a conversation happening, or is it just they've put out their option, you've put out your demand, and it's up to them to just bend to your will, or they do not get the NDP support on this?
Well, I'm the NDP finance critic. This is a finance issue, and nobody's talking to me.
Are the leaders talking, though?
I'm not sure whether they are or not, but I'll tell you, Minister Freeland and I have not talked about this at all. And this was a measure she announced. It's definitely a finance issue, right, and I've had no negotiations or discussions with her. I do want to say quickly, though, about the workers. You know, I don't accept the premise, David, from the Liberals that what the NDP is calling for doesn't include workers. You know, if you're an injured worker and you're so injured that you can't work, or you're on, let's say you're on an injury for more than a year, you're still a worker. Same thing with retired people. A lot of those people are retired workers. So, you know, I think the main thing is Canadians are struggling. And if the purpose of this is to get relief to people, then it makes sense to make sure that it goes to people who need it the most. And that's what the NDP is fighting for.
Okay, so you are the finance critic, as you pointed out. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are that we do not yet even have a date for the fall economic statement, let alone an update on what the numbers are. The suggestion from the parliamentary budget officer has been maybe the numbers are bad. I mean, what is your sense of where things are and the fact that we just don't know what's happening with the government's fiscal projections this late in the game?
Well, I think it's a combination of Liberal incompetence and Conservative partisan games. You know, it is true that the last 6, almost 7 weeks now, Parliament has been paralyzed because the Conservatives are pursuing a pointless privilege motion. It's like Groundhog Day every day here, where they bring up the same things, say the same things, and prevents Parliament from moving forward on a host of measures. We can't deal with the housing crisis, the climate crisis, the affordability crisis, the opioid crisis. So that's from their point of view. Now the Liberals, from their point of view, have been very slow. It's almost winter, so pretty soon, in a couple of weeks, it's not going to be a fall economic statement. It'll be a winter economic statement, and I don't know why they've been so slow to provide such a thing. It's a very important document in the fiscal year for Canada, and I think the Liberals are out of ideas. I don't think they're fully grasping the enormity of the fiscal problems Canadians are facing, and they don't really know what to do about it, and so they're just not tabling anything at all.
But the tradition is to do it in Parliament. You don't have to do it in Parliament. You could do it outside, you could do it somewhere else. But also, statements by ministers are continuing, even with the filibuster. So Chrystia Freeland could use that window. But you could also join with them and impose time allocation on the filibuster privilege motion to force a vote to send it to committee and get Parliament working again. But the NDP isn't willing to do that.
Well, it's not up to us to fix the Liberals' problem they got into, which, of course, we have to go back and remember. It's the Liberals' refusal to produce documents about the SDTC scandal, where tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars were misspent. There's clear conflicts of interest as Liberals were giving contracts to their friends and sometimes to themselves. So the Liberals are complicit and to blame for this as well. And they could end this by producing the documents that Parliament has requested them to do.
Right. But the Speaker has ruled to send it to committee, and if you want to get on with it and get that resolved and then get on with the other important business of Parliament, you could just send it to committee. That doesn't end the issue, it just puts it in what the Speaker has ruled as the appropriate arena for this conversation, and then you can get back to dealing with housing and dealing with affordability and all these other things, could you not?
Yeah, that's half of it for sure, but the other half is Parliament also passed a motion asking the government to send documents directly to the RCMP. As you know, we've talked about this before, they have sent almost 30,000 documents, but a lot of them are heavily redacted. So the government could end that by sending clean copies to the RCMP so that the RCMP can read exactly what's in those documents. So the Liberals are hiding information from the RCMP, and they could resolve that themselves by just simply sending unredacted documents. So it's really on the Liberals, I think, as well as the Conservatives.
Right. Well, I want to move on, but the RCMP has said this is not the way to send them the documents, and they haven't looked at what they've been sent already because they worry it compromises the investigation, and they would rather get their documents through the traditional means of subpoenas and production orders and whatnot. But the other thing that Mr. Singh said today, you're going to bring on your opposition day, the Conservatives are bringing a confidence vote, you're bringing a demand for a permanent tax cut on the GST, going along your long-held position to remove it permanently on essentials, expanding the rebate, as we've discussed, and paying for this by putting in place an excess profit tax targeting the largest and most profitable corporations. This is a lot of money to put in a private member's opposition day motion. This is billions of dollars, right? The rebate alone is $4.7 billion. How much would your GST cut cost on an annual basis, and what evidence do you have to show that an excess profit tax will cover those costs?
Well, I'll deal with the excess profits tax first, David. Other countries are doing this. This is a regular feature around the world. The UK has one, Australia has one, Spain has one. In fact, the Liberals brought one in a couple of years ago on the financial institutions on profits over $1 billion. Canada used them during both world wars, so this is not unheard of. But I mean, we saw astronomical profits pre-pandemic and post-pandemic in a number of industries. If you look at the oil and gas sector, they reported profits of a little over $6 billion in 2019, $66 billion in 2022. So that kind of windfall, we think, is fairly taxed. And that's the kind of money that we think would help to fund important programs like relief to Canadians who need it now, like our dental care program and pharmacare program, and still leave those sectors with, frankly, massive profits. So, we think that's, not only are we proposing an extra expenditure, but we're also telling the government how to pay for it.
Right. I appreciate that other countries do it, but none of those countries are in a trade arrangement with the United States, which has just elected a president who is not exactly a tax hiker, right? They're looking to cut regulations and cut taxes for corporations and individuals in the United States. So I appreciate this is how you want to pay for it, but anything that makes Canada less attractive to businesses compared to the Trump-led United States could be very problematic at this point in the economic cycle of the country, could it not?
Well, it's true. I mean, our relationship with the United States is longstanding. It's very important, and it's very important that we pay close attention to the economic policies of the United States, but we are different countries too. We have different economic systems. We have different tax structures. I mean, we have a public healthcare system that provides an important large subsidy to all Canadian businesses who are operating in this country. The Americans don't have that. So you're right, we have to be very careful to make sure that our policies are somewhat in alignment, but we also have to stand up for Canadian sovereignty and do what's best for the Canadian people, because our economies, while similar, are also different.
Right, so just as a last point, Mr. Davies, help me balance the math on your request here. A GST cut, like you're talking about, will be permanent and a cost every single year, a loss of revenue to the Treasury every single year. Excess profit tax comes in extraordinary times, maybe not every single year, because economies go up and down. So you may not be able to count on this revenue on a consistent basis to offset the permanent loss of revenue. So how do you balance things if this is your plan to pay for it?
Well, I've seen some economic data and some really strong research that shows that when you cut a consumption tax, there's a change in behavior as well. So consumers also can respond by purchasing more. So sometimes there's increased economic activity. I mean, you have to remember from a few years ago, there was a 2-point cut to the GST in this country by a previous Conservative government. So I think given that people are really struggling in this country, giving them a break, especially on life's essentials, will free up money for Canadians, most of which will be spent again and recycled into the economy.
Right.
So I think,
do you think that would drive
tax revenue.
Do you think that would drive the government revenues to offset it in some way through corporate income tax and personal income tax, that sort of thing?
It can partially offset it, that's for sure. But that's why we've also proposed the windfall profits tax, which we think is a responsible thing to do at this time. And you're right, it won't be every year, but that's why we think it's justified. When industries profiteer, and I think there was profiteering done in the pandemic and post-pandemic, that's why we did it during World War II. Sometimes corporations take advantage of an emergency and they use that to cover an unjustifiable hike in prices. And that's happened, we think, after the pandemic, and that's why we think that we should capture that revenue.
NDP finance critic Don Davies, always appreciate the time, sir. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, David.